I was so appalled that I resigned from the advisory committee.
Historians such as Stanley Goldberg, who served on the Smithsonian Advisory Board, were shocked by the concessions.
The leadership of the museum exposed the curators to the direct pressure, political pressure, from the Air Force Association, from the American Legion. In fact, the museum allowed those two groups to censor the exhibit. That's the only way you can put it.
The Smithsonian debate seemed to quickly turn into a tug of war, with most historians on one side and most veterans on the other. These men are former prisoners of war held by the Japanese. Grayford Payne has little time for the controversial questions historians want to include in the Smithsonian exhibit.
This stuff that they say that they're obligated to do is a bunch of crap. They're not obligated. They're trying to put their story out and do nothing but condemn the Americans for dropping the bomb. And that's some of our own people are doing it.
There are veterans and there are veterans. And I found
Professor Howard Zinn of Boston University is a historian who is also a veteran of World War II. He believes the Smithsonian should have gone ahead with the original exhibit.
I think they should have stuck to principle and insisted that what they were presenting in their exhibit, what they planned to present in their exhibit originally, was honest, was true. And I think if they had taken that message to the American people, if they had not surrendered immediately, if they had fought it out, then we would have had a national debate on the issue. And maybe even a lot of veterans would have changed their minds about that whole issue of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Long after his retirement from the presidency, with many of his own generals distancing themselves from his use of the atomic bomb, Harry Truman called a press conference to defend his decision for the historical record.
Question was whether we wanted to save our people and Japanese as well and win the war, or whether we wanted to take a chance on being able to win the war by killing all our young men.
Richard Hallion is the official historian of the U.S. Air Force.
The individuals who used this bomb in 1945 were motivated by the best possible motivations. They wanted to bring a war that had killed millions of people to a quick and speedy end, and they wanted to bring this suffering to a stop. And rightly or wrongly, that's what they did, and I don't think that their decision should be second-guessed the way it's being second-guessed today.
I think the moral of the story is that we Americans are humans, that all nations make errors, that all nations have to look at their history and see what they can learn from the past. The point of this is not to attack Harry Truman. The point is to learn from the mistakes.
In hindsight, if you were in the president's chair, would you send the bomb?
I have devoted a great deal of thought to that over the last number of months, and I must say that I have come to the feeling that were I in Truman's position, yes, I would have used the bomb.
Was it immoral to drop the bomb?
Yes. Yes, it was immoral. This was a destruction of women and children. Primarily, that's mainly who was left in these cities. And that was a violation of law. It was a violation of ethical code. It was a violation of everything the United States had ever stood for. It was a violation of what most top military people believed was the right thing to do. As Admiral Leahy put it, I was not taught to kill women and children. So I think, yes, it was an unethical and immoral decision.
I'm afraid I would do it again. I don't think it was right, but I'm afraid the circumstances that I was placed in made me think it was right.
And with the benefit of hindsight?
Well, of course, it was foolish. It's clear that the bomb was much more important as the beginning of a new preparation of war than as the end of a previous war, which was fading anyhow.
What did America lose by using the atomic bomb?
I think it lost a great deal of its own moral position. I think we had an elevated position during the war. It's hard to maintain that fully because the war was so terrible. But looking back on it, it still appears that the Allied side had an enormous moral advantage over the German side, over the German-Japanese side, filled with atrocities and indifference and, I would say, a kind of racism on both sides. And we lost that to a good deal by initiating this thing in such a heedless way.
In the color film, which was locked away by the U.S. military for 30 years, one of the most haunting scenes in the aftermath of the atomic bombing is this one. survivors huddled together for their 1945 Christmas services. It is the only portion of the documentary footage for which the soundtrack has been preserved. The citizens of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were grieving then for around 200,000 victims. With the after effects of the bomb, the death toll would rise to over 350,000. On every anniversary of the dropping of the bomb, Hiroshima residents come down to the river in the center of the city and light paper lanterns to memorialize the victims. 50 years later, these people are still asking why the civilian populations of their cities, their loved ones, had to die in August 1945. Every year, as we learn more about the decision to drop the bomb, it becomes more difficult to answer those questions. For Primetime News, I'm Terence McKenna in Hiroshima, Japan.
A final note on this story, as Terence mentioned earlier, the controversial exhibit on the Enola Gay at the Smithsonian is scheduled to open in May. But today, 81 U.S. congressmen called for the resignation of the Institute's director because of the proposed exhibit. The Smithsonian has scheduled a meeting for this coming Monday to attempt to reconcile the bitter differences between historians and veterans of one of history's most horrific moments. Please stay with us now. When Primetime returns, Peter will have the latest on tonight's top news story.